will join us, but let's get started. Good morning or good afternoon, everyone, wherever you're dialing in from. Welcome to Unmind's Great Minds Don't Think Alike webinar, Unlocking Neuro-Inclusion at Work. Thank you so much for joining us. We are doing 3 regional webinars on this topic this week, and today is for our North American region. So I'm dialing in and joining you from Toronto. During the next hour, we will be hearing from our panel of experts on what neurodiversity is, how to raise awareness about neurodiversity in the workplace, sharing some practical tips for managers in creating neuro-inclusive environments, and exploring how we can foster workplaces where all minds can really thrive. This is an incredibly important topic. We know that 1 in 7 of us have neurological differences, and today really is an opportunity to shed light on neuro-inclusivity and have an open and honest conversation as we continue to make progress towards creating workplaces where everyone can really flourish. So I will ask a few questions of our panel, and we'll have some time towards the end to get to your questions. So please pop any questions you have in the Q&A box throughout the session. So let's get started with some introductions. My name is Laura Cheesewright. I will be hosting today's session. I am the Executive Solutions Lead here at Unmind. I have a master's in global mental health and have previously worked as a researcher at the Centre for Addiction and Mental Health in Toronto. So have had the opportunity to look closely at the pivotal intersection between our environment and our cultural conditions and the promotion of positive mental health. At Unmind, I have the privilege of working closely with our science and psychology team, really scaling our commitment to credibility and ensuring the evidence base remains the linchpin of our strategy here, and get the chance to collaborate closely with senior leaders in our clients and prospective clients to support that journey of creating a healthier, more inclusive working environment. Really excited to be with you all today and now get the privilege of welcoming our incredible panel. I'm going to pass to Dr. Lauren first. Lauren, if you could please introduce yourself and share a bit about why this topic is so important to you.
Hello, everyone. I am Lauren Megrew. I am an industrial and organizational psychologist and a clinical therapist, and I specialize in neurodiversity across the spectrum. I live in Arizona. And what I do is I work with adults around the world, helping them learn to understand if and how they are neurodiverse, and then learning how to proactively manage that. I also work with organizations, teaching them to understand the reality of neurodiversity and how to best support the amazing neurodiverse community that I am lucky enough to be a part of.
Amazing. Thank you, Lauren. Over to you, Briana.
Hi, everyone. I'm Briana Gilmore. I currently work as the head of accessibility policy at Uber. My background is in urban planning. So my academic and early career background is in urban planning and public health policy until I really found my community of lived experience advocates across the disability spectrum. And so for the past about 10 years, I've been a disability advocate and researcher, educator, and policymaker. Now have the pleasure of working with a great team at Uber to really design operational and policy strategies that meet the needs of any of our users with disabilities. I'm multiply disabled myself, and so I've advocated in a lot of my lived experience communities. But here I'm excited to talk today about my lived experience as an autistic woman. I also experience ADHD and synesthesia.
Thank you, Briana. And Vivian.
Hi, everybody. My name is Vivian Acquah, and I'm a certified DEI consultant who supports organizations when it comes to DEI in general. And one of the things that I like to use is using virtual reality so that people can walk a mile in whoever shoes they are. So we do have scenarios where people can walk a mile in a neurodiverse person's shoes to understand the barriers, but also the challenges and also the win that organizations can leverage from that experience. So I'm looking forward to this conversation. I'm neurodiverse myself, and I'm looking forward to having this conversation with you all.
Perfect. Thank you, Vivian. Thank you, Briana. Thank you, Lauren. We are very excited and very lucky to have you with us today. So we're going to start with some questions from me. As a reminder, if you have any questions, please pop them into the Q&A box and we'll get to them towards the end of the hour. I thought it would be really helpful to start with making sure we all have a solid base understanding of neurodiversity. So I'm going to come to you first, Lauren. Can you tell us what is neurodiversity and what are some of the common neurodivergent conditions in the workplace? Oh, sorry, Lauren, I think you are muted. Has to happen at least once, doesn't it? Yeah, you're good now.
All right, so neurodiversity refers to an amazing population of unique individuals who I feel are lucky enough, I'm going to call it, to both think and experience life differently. Like those living on the autism spectrum with Asperger's, with ADHD, even dyslexia. It is also a disability rights movement backed by science and positive psychology that stresses that neurodivergent thinking is a natural and normal variation of the human brain. And that these neurodivergent conditions, they are actually the fastest growing mental health diagnoses around the world for both children and adults. Now, like many high-functioning adults nowadays, I didn't realize this about myself until I was an adult and in my early 30s. And it wasn't until after my daughter got her diagnosis. But it was interesting because despite already being a therapist, everything I had been taught about autism, about ADHD, it did not look like me. It did not look like my daughter. Excuse me. It is all based on a stereotype that was created in the late 1900s and is predominantly based on the pediatric white male presentation. But the newest research into neurodiversity has revolutionized our understanding of it, and it proves beyond the shadow of a doubt that the spectrums of neurodiversity are so much more beautifully complex than anybody gave them credit for. But neurodiversity stems from our nervous systems, our brains, and the cognitive processes of how it interprets communication, social language, the sensory information of the world around us. But another interesting thing is that neurodiverse people are actually born with a shorter path to fight or flight in our nervous system, and more things that will consistently but unpredictably ping against that reactivity behind the scenes. And as that's happening, it impacts our executive functioning skills, which is one of the most talked about aspects that come up in the workplace. It is our brain's ability to manage attention, distractibility, time management, organization, prioritization, even down to impulsivity and emotional regulation. Now, medication is an important part of this, but there is no one size fits all and there is no magic pill. But despite this, there are some constants. Executive functioning is not a choice. And the closer we get to that line of fight or flight, the harder it is for us to be logical, analytical, and to use those executive functioning skills. There's a theory in psychology called Spoon's theory, and it deals or it refers to the energy limitations that occur when you experience a chronic condition. So think that every spoon is an energy I have to give out to get a task done, to mask, to use my executive functioning skills, to manage my anxiety. And as all of us, my goal is to get through my day, to be efficient, effective, fantastic at my job, still have time and energy left over to be a good partner, to be a good parent, to take care of myself. And this is why supporting neurodiverse employees is so important. It helps us manage our spoons. And the better I can manage my spoons, the better I can have a work-life balance that works, but the better I can knock my job out of the park in a way that a lot of other people couldn't. But yes, brave new world when it comes to neurodiversity today.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Lauren. That's such helpful insight. Thank you for sharing a bit about some of the psychology and science. And the spoon theory wasn't something I was familiar with, and it was such an interesting piece of intel that you shared with us during some of our initial conversations as well. So thank you for that. I know one of the things you mentioned was about stereotypes and some misconceptions we see when it comes to neurodiversity. Vivian, I'd love to come to you next. I know a quote we talked about in one of our discussions a few weeks ago was when you met one neurodivergent person, you've met one neurodivergent person, and no minds are the same. Like any inclusion and diversity work, we have to challenge and understand our unconscious bias when it comes to these topics. So Vivian, as a DEI coach and with your expertise, what are some of the common misconceptions and stereotypes we see around neurodiversity?
What isn't helpful is that Hollywood and also the media has portrayed a way how we can see neurodiversity. And even for myself, right? I learned neurodiversity or learned about autism through Tom Hanks playing his role in one of the amazing movie, Life is a Box of Chocolate. I don't remember the name at the moment right now, but also you have The Piano Man. And there are so many ways that predominantly men are being portrayed, right? I don't see myself when it comes to neurodiversity thinking that women cannot be neurodiverse and women cannot be autistic. Why? Because we don't see other role models and other role models seeing us in high functioning roles as well, because there is this one side lens that a person who is autistic or has ADHD is acting in a certain way, right? And there is a spectrum. I'm a high functioning person. I didn't realize that until I learned more about being neurodivergent and realizing that all these different roles that I have, they click. I understand that right now. So I want to demystify, I want to debunk the mystery around being neurodivergent. And if anybody is wondering whether they are neurodivergent, they can always raise more awareness or do some more training or go to their specialist, the medical specialist, and ask more questions. I found out, just similar like Lauren, I found it out through my son, and that's when I started to reflect upon myself that there's so much more to us.
Thank you, Vivian. And I know you've done some incredible work in terms of driving awareness around this topic and the importance of doing that in the workplace to make sure we're creating really inclusive environments. Briana, you bring 15 years in public health and disability justice experience to the table, and in your role as head of accessibility policy at Uber, I imagine you've borne witness to an incredible amount of change, as we all have in the past few years in the kind of wake of the pandemic. How have our expectations and understanding of neurodiversity shifted in the workplace? And can you share some of the incredible strengths our neurodiverse colleagues bring to the table in work?
Yeah, sure. And I'll certainly get into this during our time together, just about how diverse our strengths are. They're as diverse as any of your neurotypical colleagues. And I think that's like one of the misconceptions, right? Because we do have this mythology around what neurodiversity looks like. Lauren and Vivian just kind of like drew out the binary of what we usually see. We either see it as infantilized and unmanageable. It's the explosive, 6-year-old white boy or the teenage boy who's like isolated and ostracized, or it's highly fetishized, right? It's this brilliant mathematician or engineer who's like sympathetically sorrowful, and he has this like, brilliant boss who recognizes his excellence, and the diminutive wife who supports him. And this hyper fetishization and paternalization really impacts us in the workplace, especially as femmes. We have the highest unemployment rate of any group of people with disabilities. It's up to 97%. So femmes of color, people who've been gendered as at birth as women who are people of color experience a 97% unemployment rate if they have a college degree. And that is not because of the effects of our disability. It is because the effects of isolation and ableism, and what that means and how that leads to burnout, especially when we get to the place in our career where we have the most to offer. So of course, we're talking about strategies in the workplace, but something to know is that neurodiversity really just doesn't just present as your colleague who might be a little bit socially awkward, right? For many of us, we've been isolated, criticized, pathologized, institutionalized, drugged against our will, and abused our entire lives. For those of us who narrowly escape it, and for many of us, including myself, I narrowly escaped that. It is a great cost to mask what I've been through and also the impacts of my disability on my work to achieve as much as one of my neurotypical colleagues. And so to get through my day, as Lauren was noting, it does come at a great cost that many of us pay in isolation. And because of that, because we've been through so much and because we have so much resilience, we do have a lot to offer. Really, I think that one of the most common myths that we have to destigmatize is that neurodivergent people aren't socially adept, which really is largely untrue, especially for those of us who are feminized. We're highly attuned. We have to be. We are hyper vigilant about social situations. Our ability to engage interpersonally, sometimes we can turn on and off, especially if we're used to managing that in a collegial setting, but it can be exhausting. What neurotypicals often don't realize is that what we do mostly struggle with is evasiveness, dishonesty, and when values and goals don't align with strategy and operations. And so if we're confused, it's usually because that the values that neurotypicals have stated are driving their work actually aren't the ones that they're upholding. And what we did learn, I think, during a couple of years of quarantine and during COVID is that accommodations were really readily available for the general population, things that we and other disabled folks had been asking for decades: the right to work from home, the right to work virtually, the right to have conversations at work about managing anxiety, about mass disability, and the disabling impacts of a work environment. And as soon as mostly able-bodied people have determined that it's safe enough to go back to work, a lot of those accommodations have been removed for all of us, and we're expected to just get it. And if we don't need what's thought of as to be a physical accommodation at work, our right to accommodations that we got used to during COVID have been taken away from us, and we're expected to adapt after a couple more years of being forced into isolation and a lot of us not having our needs recognized. And also really what has become this massive exploration, especially for people who have been feminized, into their neurodiversity. A lot of us have sought diagnoses, support, and treatment, social acceptance, finding communities online for the first time in our lives. And so this is a really big moment as we're trying to re-normalize work for us to figure out what neuro-inclusion can mean as we move back to the office.
Thank you so much, Briana. That's such helpful context. And thank you for illuminating some of those stereotypes and challenges and speaking to some of the accommodations we've seen over the past few years that are moving us in the direction of more inclusive workplaces. Lauren, I would love to hear your organizational psychologist perspective on this as well, thinking about the role of the manager. That's become a key point in conversation over the past couple of years and in the wake of some of the changes we've seen throughout the COVID pandemic. What management techniques and tools can be implemented to help our neurodiverse colleagues and individuals excel at work?
I remembered to unmute this time, so. Education and awareness is so unbelievably important because most people have their awareness stop at the stereotype. But one of the things that Briana had mentioned, the ability to work from home, having that flexibility to accommodate what I need, there's a reason for it. Our nervous systems is what is unique. One thing that you will commonly hear about neurodiverse people is we can have this amazing attention to detail. But that is not just in a work ethic or me hyper-focusing. I have a sensory system that can potentially notice all of the different aspects of my environment at the same time with the same level of attention. And we have an external environment and an internal one. So everything from noticing how the lights make me feel, noticing the specifics of the clothes I might be wearing, noticing the buzz in electricity that nobody else seems to notice. And then the temperature regulation, the fact that I might not remember to eat these very unique things, it becomes a condition of compounding stressors. And the more things there are, the harder it is for me to do what I need and want to do, which is just do my job. So the ability to work from home, to have a hybrid schedule, it's not just well, I don't want to go to work. It's when I get to control my environment, I get to save the energy. And I get to use whatever energy I save and don't waste noticing the environment on what I am focusing on to be the most productive and to knock things out of the park. Now, flexibility, it also could come in the terms of start times and end times. I am lucky enough that I work from home, and it's been fantastic. But when I did work with other people, one thing that was helpful was the ability to start before other people. So I could get a lot of work done without having to notice the extra sounds, distractions, the people, the conversation, the anxiety. And I could be twice as effective if I am just allowed the ability to say what works best for me based on me, not based on somebody else's expectations of what it should be or what it's supposed to be. So it also could be, if you do have to be in an environment, how can you let your employee adapt to it? Because it is through no fault of their own that the lights give them a migraine, and that there's distractibility and people popping in all the time. But to transition my attention as a neurodiverse person from what I'm trying to focus on to something else, it's like an all stop, slam on the brakes and trying to figure it out. But if I can just create my schedule, have the flexibility to block off focus time, uninterrupted time, I can make sure that I can do everything and then more that I need to do. Let's see. One thing that is very, very common with neurodiverse brains is the way that we organize information. So our brains can do so well if we fully understand the parameters of the expectation and the situation. If I've got that, I can run at it. But if I don't, I have follow-up questions so that I can fully understand your expectations, the prioritizations, the needs. And then you won't need to talk to me again because I have it. But the ability to ask questions is not always looked upon favorably. It's looked at as you weren't listening, or why can't you figure it out, or why don't you get it? But it helps my brain be able to fully understand all of the situation, and that way I can be the most effective and efficient. But that non-judgment is huge. Let's see, what are some other? Gaslighting is a very, very, very common thing in the workplace and in the rest of life. So part of education and awareness is putting stops in place to stop inherent discriminatory practices, to bring biases to people's attention, and to be able to make sure that people feel valid for the struggles that they have. It's not a fault. It's not something that makes me less than, and it does not make me less qualified or capable. But it impacts my ability to execute dependent on how many things I have to notice and manage, both externally and internally.
Amazing. Thank you, Lauren. That's such helpful context. And thank you for illuminating the importance of hybrid and flexibility when it comes to supporting our neurodiverse colleagues, and sharing some tips on how we can create environments that really empower all of our people to perform to their best. Briana, I think another key topic that we wanted to touch on today was thinking about the role of leadership as well. We know our leaders really are the architects of culture in our organizations. What role does leadership play in fostering a workplace culture that embraces neurodiversity and supports all of our employees? And how do we balance the needs of neurodiverse employees with the goals of our organization?
Yeah, absolutely. I came up with some that I realized that they feel like maybe they're a little bit over the map, but I realized they're just the ones that I have a lot of experience in seeing, and in the organizations that I've worked for and consulted for. And so I'm offering these for a reason, even though they might not feel like they're in a straight line. So of course, neuro-inclusion, we do have to accept that, like, if we want a richly diverse workforce, and if we really want to meet broad goals and like a deep value proposition, neuro-inclusion can be incredibly effective. And it does mean certain things, right? Like, it does mean representation, especially across executive leadership and in management. Does not mean hiring one person like me and shoving them to the front to talk about your neuro-inclusion strategies, right? It really means thorough representation. That requires intentionality in terms of affirmative hiring practices, and proactive and not reactive accommodations. I should not have to tell you and ask. It should be proactive the way that you're approaching an accommodations process. I would say, as an executive leader, if you're trying to support neuro-inclusion, please do not support organizations that just focus on children, and do not support organizations that that have a goal of curing autism. We don't want to be cured. That's eugenics. I love being autistic. I wouldn't change it for the world. Please don't signal to your workforce that the way that you will include is by curing me. Managers at every level should receive regular training on how to support people with different lived experiences. This includes and is not limited to disability. There are specific skill sets, as Lauren indicated, that makes for a neuro-inclusive manager. People did not learn this in school. They most likely didn't learn it at their previous job. If you haven't trained on it, your managers aren't doing it. They just aren't. They're maybe figuring it out because they're good, empathetic people, but they're struggling. They don't know if they're getting it right. They don't know how to say the right thing. They don't know what's legally compliant, and they're having to fumble around and ask questions and come up with solutions, with the people that they manage, if that person is lucky. You really have to empower and build conditions of trust. And I think that one of the ways that you can do this, of course, is embedding people with lived experience in your leadership strategy, in your DEI strategy, not in a tokenizing way. This can't be free labor. This is not professional development for me. This is not only a professional skill set, it is a highly leveraged emotional and personal skill set. And when we talk about meeting values propositions, this is another thing for managers. If you hear all of this and your physical instinct is to shrink and restrict and cringe and maybe try not to roll your eyes, it's completely understandable, because you have a goal, and anything else aside from that goal can really feel like a detour. Inclusion can feel like a detour. And we're here to tell you that it's not. And part of what Lauren was just talking about is really the way that we're systems thinkers. Neurodiverse people are allergic to lying, we are allergic to injustice, and most of all, we are allergic to glitches in your system. You are highly complex executives who know what it takes to manage a web, a very high complex tentative web to get to a goal. If there is a glitch in your system, we will find it. And so one of the reasons that you should be including us in your goals is because we consistently raise red flags. So for example, if employees in your all hands meetings complain week after week about your return to office policy, and you just can't understand why they don't get the point and they keep asking over and over again, you are 8 to 12 months away from a mass employee exodus. We are waving a red flag. If you have a trusted product manager, engineer, communications lead on your team who keeps raising a red flag about a new operational or product goal that everyone else agrees is imperfect but necessary, you're most likely about to ship a losing bet. And if you have a trusted team member who won't stop talking about the need to be transparent with your customer base about a goal or an inability to meet a goal, you're 6 to 8 months away from a major hit in a key opinion former base on social media or through litigation. Listen to your employees, even if you don't know whether or not they're neurodiverse. If they're raising red flags, it is very often a neurodiverse colleague who's recognizing a glitch in your system that you are holding in the balance to meet your value proposition.
Thank you, Briana. I think, yeah, incredibly important, and recognizing the role of listening and paying attention when it comes to understanding and supporting our colleagues, as well as the role of inclusion in strategic and executive success, and how pivotal it is, and being proactive in the accommodations that we're taking. So thank you for highlighting the role that leadership plays in this and some of those key skills that we need to equip our managers with to ensure they are being neuro-inclusive. Vivian, I know something you briefly mentioned when we were introducing ourselves was your role as a parent. I'd love to come to you as well and ask, how can organizations take into account what it's like to be a parent with a neurodivergent condition, or to be parenting a neurodivergent child?
I can definitely talk about that. But first of all, I have to say kudos to Lauren and Briana, because it was challenging to listen and also think about what I'm about to say right now. I really want people to ask, to include the audience, right? Because most of the times when DEI initiatives have been set, they don't include the people for who they are, right? And that's one of the things that Briana and Lauren also shared, like, include us. And if you don't have people who want to come forward, then bring external people who know more about neuro-inclusion. I really understand also the factor that so many office buildings are not equipped to empower those who are neurodivergent. For an instance, I used to wear my headphones. There are so many neurodivergent people that wear headphones. Why? Because they want to tune out the noise and the lack of losing energy. If you are removing the headphones of your colleague or a client or somebody else, you are making them unproductive. And I want to say that we need to learn more about neurodiversity, whether it's walking a mile in somebody else's shoes or raising awareness, providing policies, procedures to amplify neurodivergency, because some people are masking, some people are not masking, and we need to dig in a little bit deeper to understand what the spectrum of neurodiversity is, so that we can best support the people in the future as well. So whether you are a parent of a neurodivergent child or whether you are neurodivergent, I think that providing that mental health package, so providing mental health support, providing mental health days. I've seen some companies providing off days where people can take a mental health day without any questions asked, and I want that back. It's not only, I noticed that during the COVID break that a lot of companies were providing that, but I've also noticed that some of the companies are, walking back from that promise, and I say, give it back. Offer remote working as well, flexibility, because that's what parents need in general.
Thank you so much, Vivian. Before we jump into some of the Q&A questions in the chat, I'd love to, I think it's really important when it comes to this topic, we know the importance of managers, we know the importance of leadership. I think it's also integral to think about how do we support each other? How do we support our colleagues when it comes to the topic of neurodiversity? What role do we all play in creating neuro-inclusive environments? So Lauren, I'll come to you first, and then we'd love to hear from you, Briana and Vivian as well. Can you share an experience that you've had of how someone's support has positively affected you at work?
Oh my. Oh. One of the things I believe Briana had mentioned, that, there's these stereotypes out there of the supportive wife behind the genius husband and all that. I'm gonna flip that one. I'm going to say that the ability to teach my husband to understand the reality of neurodiversity has been huge, because if I come home or end my day and I have no spoons, life becomes difficult. It's harder to be touched, it's harder to talk, it's harder to feel calm, and that's not the person I want to be at home with my family. So having him understand this, if he sees that I'm struggling, it's an automatic, I'm going to take a little bit of a break. If I can take that 20 minutes, go for a walk, decompress, listen to music, I can be me again, and then have the rest of my night to enjoy my family. But sometimes people wait for people to ask, or for others to ask the right question. I say, tell them what you need them to know, because this is important. It's not going anywhere. And why should somebody have to struggle in silence just because the way they struggle is different than how other people do?
Thank you, Lauren. I'll come to you next, Briana.
Yeah, sure. I would say I was just kind of thinking of maybe the example that I always draw about how shame-inducing it can be every time I can't do something that other people find really simple. And it doesn't matter how far ahead I get into my career. Like if you asked me to offer a presentation tomorrow to 500 webinar participants about how neo-colonialism has impacted the dietary choices of informal migrants in South Asia, like, okay, no problem, I can do that. If you asked me to order lunch for the 4 of us after this presentation, like I'm getting sweaty just thinking about it. It's so uncomfortable. Like, please don't ever ask me to do that. And so the colleagues who have known me best and who have supported me or seen me in my neurodivergence, or just like witnessed my discomfort in being asked to do something like a linear task that somebody else might find really easy to do. And just to take that over for me, if it's easy for them, or to recognize that that's not something that's necessary within my skill set to operationalize, that's really helpful for me, because what we often experience is the opposite, is that we're like highly capable and feel great about our role in our work. And then we're asked to do something that really shouldn't be in our skill set otherwise. It's a huge challenge for us. And then we're looked at like we're idiots because we kind of crumble and can't do it. And that leads to high anxiety and shame. It's a terrible spiral that sometimes medication and as much self-care in the world can't get us out of. And so just having people recognizing and attuning themselves to us and our support needs is really helpful.
Thank you. Vivian?
For me personally, what has been a success was when companies included me in the conversations that they are having in designing their workplace, right? Because I look at the workplace differently. I look at the lighting, I look at the sensory, but also the fact that so many offices don't have a quiet room or a desensitizing room where people can recharge. And if that's lacking, ooh, then they'll hear me. So the fact that there was a client who listened to me and created a nursery room, created a silence room just for the people to recharge. And I do want to say that if your company or if your office is remodeling or redesigning, make sure that they hire somebody who has the skills of neuro-inclusion, so that that factor is also included in the workplace as well. A nap room, yes. Yes, please.
Yes.
I would say re-energize room, because napping, you know, other people might think that you're doing something else. Re-energize room.
I like the sound of a re-energized room. Thank you all for sharing those experiences of how people have effectively supported you. We're going to jump into some of the questions from our attendees now. I'm going to come to you first, Lauren. Do you find there is a preference in terminology when speaking about the topic of neurodivergent and neurodiverse?
Oh, there's always going to be specifics with discourse. The most important thing is that if you're not entirely sure, do some research, get some information, or ask a question. And like we've been saying, include the person in the process. Neurodiversity tends to be used a lot because it is more of a blanket term. Under the umbrella of neurodiversity, there is autism, there's Asperger's, there's ADHD, there's dyslexia, there's PTSD. But even within the autism spectrum, there's multiple sub-profiles for each of these different levels. ADHD is just as much of a spectrum phenomenon as autism is. So a lot of the times neurodiversity just gets thrown out as the catch-all, but there is power in being seen and being included. I am autistic, I have ADHD. My daughter is autistic, ADHD, and dyslexic. Because there's so much variability and so much uniqueness in the presentation across the spectrums, sometimes just blanket referring to something doesn't really do it justice and really support the reality of what the individuals or the employees are dealing with.
Thank you. I think, yeah, definitely a topic that's coming out loud and clear today is the importance of listening and asking questions and seeking out the information and making sure that we're including our colleagues and our neurodiverse peers in the discussions that we're having when it comes to this. We know language is really important when it comes to making people feel seen and included. So thank you for sharing that perspective. The next question is for Briana. How would you suggest we execute these conversations with managers?
That's a really tricky one. I don't think that there's a one size fits all approach. I haven't necessarily talked to my manager about this. I haven't said, hey, I'm autistic, I need support. I think that, they know, managers often know my accommodations request or when they come up. Sometimes I feel like I can ask for them and sometimes I can't. I think that to be told over and over again that if you need an accommodation, there's a process for it, or if you need it, just ask. For many of us, we don't live in that world. We just don't exist in a world where we can trust that. And then to be vulnerable enough to say that I am this thing, or I have this thing that I don't know if you understand or not. I don't know what stigmas you hold around it. I don't know how you're going to perceive how that's going to impact my work, but I'm going to make myself vulnerable enough to identify myself as that thing, and then tell you I need a thing that might be annoying to you, or might at least take more work or energy or money or time in a way that like makes you question your own skills and values. It's a tremendously complex ask of an employee to talk to their manager about their needs, which is certainly why an accommodations process really should bypass a manager. And that should be clear to employees of like, you should never have to speak directly to somebody with a position of power over you about an accommodation need. You should know that you have the right to that accommodation, and you are granted that accommodation before you're ever expected to talk to your manager about that. I also think that peer support in the workplace is highly valuable. Like I can't give a blanket answer to that, but if a person comes to me on Slack and says, I'm autistic too, and I'm struggling with this, and I've asked my manager for this and they don't understand, or I'm in this department and it has this kind of culture, we can work together. We can work on, how is it bothering you? Do you really need to talk to your manager, or is it really about self-support that you need? Is it about an accommodation that you're not getting, or you don't even know what it is that you need yourself? You don't know how to identify it. And so I think recognizing that, like, just knowing that you should talk to your manager, like give yourself grace if that doesn't feel like what you can do. It's totally possible that you are not in that kind of trusting relationship, and recognize that there are other forms of support that could get you to the place of confidence to find what you need.
Thank you, Briana, for that insight, and for really drawing on the importance of peer-to-peer support as well. I've got another follow-up question for you as well. I know you'd been mentioning the importance of being proactive when it comes to accommodations in the workplace. Can you share some examples of what that could look like in practice?
Yeah, I mean, so when I first met with my recruiter, and I've already talked to them about this, so I'm not outing them, but the first question that I was asked in my first phone screening for my job, they said, Uber is now, back to work 50% time, was not in the job listing. So I just want to make sure that before we proceed, you're able to be in the office 50% of the time and commit to that before we proceed with the interview. And I said yes. And then for 3 weeks afterwards was in a shame spiral about the fact that I had just lied. Because maybe it was a yes, but I actually had no idea. I had no idea what the office environment and culture was like. I didn't actually know what that expectation would look like, where my office would be, and what my team would look like. And I was deeply concerned that I had just lied to my recruiter. And so the first part of the hiring process was not affirmative or proactive to disability. It was not neuro-inclusive. And so if we're really talking about proactive accommodations, we're assuming that every single one of our colleagues needs an accommodation. Every single one of them. Every single one of your colleagues could be a person with a disability who not only could benefit from, but for whom an accommodation is required to maximize their work. And so to have to jump through hoops, to have less than transparent information, to have to go with this long, complicated communication process between an external vendor and a physician that I might not even have, and maybe I'm struggling to get a diagnosis or even know what I need. I do believe that every single one of your employees or your colleagues would benefit from personalized outreach at the outset, to be made aware of accommodations that are available to them, and to be supported in knowing that whoever they are, however they're showing up, even if it's a temporary disability, even if it's something that they don't know that they need when they start a job, that there is a method, that there's a resource for supportive inclusion. That is the way that we keep our employees for the long term.
One thing to just add, the interview process itself is biased as heck. A lot of the time people are looking for outward measures that do not actually potentially measure my skill set. They're looking at outward for appearance. Are you looking at them in the eye? Are you smiling at the right time, in the right places? Did you communicate back and forth? Did you pick up on the joke? But those aren't necessarily specific to the job set. So remembering that it starts from the very first second to how you word the specifics of your job posting, to how you interview for it, to identifying, like you said, right off the bat, we are trying to be very inclusive. Are there any potential accommodations that you've ever used in the past that have been helpful, that you could potentially benefit from in this environment?
Thank you, Lauren. Thank you, Briana. Really helpful to hear some tips about how we can be more neuro-inclusive when it comes to our hiring and recruitment practices as well. I'm going to come to you now, Vivian. One of the things we've talked a bit about today is the importance of recognizing neurodiversity in helping us focus our energy better. Is there a connection that DEI can help us build a more resource-saving, environmentally friendly society?
DEI is in everything, right? I've seen a few questions regarding the physical space, but I've also seen a few questions regarding internally, where without awareness training, people don't know what neurodiversity is, right? They have this stigma about Forrest Gump, who I forgot to name, where we can learn so much more about the different levels of neurodiversity, right? And also to answer some of the a question that came up. I have misophonia. So when I'm in an open space and the conversation is or a colleague is hijacking a conversation, hijacking my peace, hijacking my focus, that means that I am now connected to that conversation that is a few meters away, which is distracting me not to be productive. So what I would suggest in this case is really have outside knowledge, bring outside knowledge inside to have that conversation about neurodiversity, but also how can we empower neurodivergent people? We don't know what we don't know. So walk a mile in somebody else's shoes, use the virtual reality training, or find other ways to learn more about neurodiversity, because it's so much more than what we see on television. It's so much more that you might even recognize yourself, you might even recognize a colleague, you might even recognize a loved one who's dealing with neurodiversity. So many people don't know that they are neurodivergent, especially women. And the fact that somebody mentioned that she's a woman and she recently found out that she's neurodivergent, I'm part of that crew. And the fact that we are all women here on this panel, and we have something with this topic. I've never seen a conversation like this. Majority of the neurodivergent topic is predominantly focused to men and predominantly focused to white men. Not bashing white men, but I do want to highlight that we need to share the story as is, and this is how neurodivergent can be as well.
Thank you, Vivian. And yeah, it's been fantastic to see some of the feedback coming through the channel. I'm going to do one more question from the Q&A before we start to wrap up. Lauren, I'm going to direct this one to you with your clinical psychologist hat on. How do you know if you are ADHD? Many people may not like open spaces, noise in an open office because they can't concentrate and simply work better on their own, but might not be ADHD. How would you know? And does suffering with anxiety mean you are ADHD? It is such a huge topic.
Oh my. Well, if you really want to know, that's why you call me, and I will tell you and help you figure it out. But the bottom line is what we're looking to address is how people are struggling and creating equity in the workplace, that everybody is able to have whatever they need, so everybody has access to the same opportunity to be happy, successful, productive, to feel pushed and driven, and then still have something left over at night. So in some ways, sometimes I tell people, I don't care if we call it autism, ADHD, or a banana. Let's figure out how it's impacting your life, and let's figure out how you can proactively learn to navigate some of these things that are inherently difficult for you. If you are seeking medication, you are going to need an official diagnosis. So looking into people who are open about neurodiversity. When you go to their website, are they specifically talking about anxiety and depression, or do they mention neurodivergence? Do they mention equality and equity? And then having anxiety does not necessarily mean you are neurodiverse, but almost 90+% of the people that are neurodiverse are going to struggle with clinically significant anxiety. So the first thing that you can do is try to listen to other people's stories. There is this, it's like a neurodivergent renaissance that has been going on across social media reality. And there's so many examples of people's lived experiences of them talking about, this is how it impacts me, separate from this or different from this, because like Vivian had mentioned, it is so highly individualistic. I am an ADHD person, autism, ADHD. So is my daughter. And despite the fact that I grew that human, the way her neurodiversity impacts her is still different than mine. So talking to a professional is the best way to get to right to the answers, but ask some questions first and make sure that they have chosen to read the next chapter in scholarship that proves that neurodiversity is not what it used to be. And then start to work on figuring out what are the specifics of what I struggle with. A lot of us will see trouble from this top-down umbrella perspective. It looks like one big thing. But when you flip that umbrella upside down, there's 8 individual separate spokes holding that up. So work on parsing out what are the things that I struggle with, and then keep reading, keep researching. And if you get to a point where you really think that this is something that impacts you, that's when you loop in the professional. And they can give you the official yes or no, whether you need it for professional accommodations or whether you need it to understand your kiddo or whether you need it to understand and advocate for yourself.
I would
Amazing.
also like to add something. This is not regarding the diagnosis, but more regarding the tools, right? I do believe that employees should have tools for those who are dealing with dyslexia, those who are dealing with dyscalculia, and those who just need the support system of having maybe, how do you say it, a mental health app like Headspace or something else so that they can woosah in the workplace. That's what I wanted to add as well.
And just so we know, dyslexia, difficulty with reading, there are 7 different subtypes of dyslexia. Dysgraphia is a specific learning disorder that deals with the difficulty with writing, and dyscalculia is a specific learning disorder that deals with math. And they are highly, highly common across the board of neurodivergency.
Thank you, Lauren. I think as mentioned in the comments, it is such a huge topic and there is so much space for us to be educating ourselves on this. So we've got 7 minutes left. We're coming up to the hour, so it is time to start to wrap up today's session. There are a few questions in the chat that we didn't get the chance to get to, but we will sync as a team afterwards and can collect those and maybe share some thoughts afterwards. There is always so much more that we would want to cover in these sessions. With the last few minutes that we have left, I would love to hear from our fantastic panelists one more time. So we'd love to give you all a minute just to share your final thoughts. What do you feel it's important to leave the audience with today? I will come to you first, Briana.
Sure. Yeah, I guess I was reflecting on this because I saw something in the chat about aging and neurodiversity and also autoimmune disorders, which we didn't necessarily touch on, but it's so common for neurodiverse folks to acquire autoimmune disorders. This is a very complex nervous system issue at the intersection of anxiety and trauma, and the fact that we're forced to force our stims back in our body when we mask, and it builds up and creates an autoimmune disorder. So neurodiversity is also disabling. And I would say really like the greatest gift in my life is to be multiply disabled, and not in a way that's like kind of woo-woo, like self-love, self-care speak. It's really this complete reversal from the way that I think all of us probably grew up in the 90s. I'm speaking to my fellow panelists, where disability was that thing that was either like shameful and ostracized or hyper fetishized and pedestalized, where it's something so different for me now, where especially as I get older, like every year, I just love my brain more and more and more. Like as my body gets more and more disabled and I'm able to be more and more curious and investigative about the ways that disability shapes my world and then shapes me, I think it's incredible. It is a brilliant thing. I'm endlessly curious about it. And I just think that, so we hold so much of this self-shame. I think especially neurotypical people do, of like, I'm going to say the wrong thing. I'm going to do the wrong thing. Like, we want to share it with you. It's awesome. Like, come join us. It's so fantastic. And it's so like brilliant to talk about it, even when it's the worst. And I think that just like breaking down those boundaries and talking about disability joy is really a future I envision. I know it's going to take a while to get there. It's not tomorrow for each of us. But for those of you who do feel that way, in your own selves and wish that others could share it, like that is the future that I think that we can look forward to.
Thank you, Briana. Over to you, Lauren, for your final thoughts.
Oh, gosh. Speaking a little bit more about what Briana said, the ability to hold myself to the right expectation. The first 30-something years of my life, I held myself to the expectation of neurotypicality. And even when I was successful at some things, there was always something that I was struggling with that wasn't working, where I felt like I was failing at it, where everybody else could do it and I just couldn't. But the reality proves, fact after scientifically valid fact, that I'm just neurodivergent. And I operate the exact way that I am designed and put together too. But being able to hold myself to the expectation of just being exactly who I am, I don't feel like I'm failing anymore. I have my struggles. I own my struggles. I understand them. And because I do, I can proactively make sure that more times than not, I am advantageous. But it is also so that the few times out of 10, it does become a real struggle. I can give myself permission to struggle with exactly what the heck I am supposed to struggle with and not beat myself up. So yes, there's the workplace, there's the ability to take that confidence and then put it out into the rest of the world, because I get to raise my child like that. She gets to grow up knowing exactly who she is and not struggle to try to be somebody else. And that's what I would hope or want for everybody, is to just be able to know who you are, be confident in your own skin, and go do what you need to do with the world.
Amazing. Thank you, Lauren. And Vivian?
Wow, I need to go after both of them, right? I just want to say that this conversation, and I hope future conversation, let's do our best to not make neurodiversity a dirty word, because it's being perceived as is. And I just want to give neurodiversity a different face, especially for my child who is neurodivergent. Through him, I'm able to be myself and I'm able to be me. But thinking back to the way that I grew up and also the way that I was walking around in the workplace, I had to mask myself a gazillion times. And now that I'm able to unmask myself, it's liberating, it's freeing. And that's what I'm on a mission to share that with other people so that they can unmask themselves and liberate themselves as well.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Vivian. We've got a couple minutes left to the hour. Thank you so much to our incredible panelists. This has been such a fantastic discussion. Thank you for sharing your perspectives, your experiences, your expertise with us all. It's been so incredibly valuable, and we can see from the chat that all of our attendees have found it that way as well. So, and a big thank you to all of our attendees. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for being so engaged and active in this conversation and seeking out more information about how to make the places you work more neuro-inclusive. It's so fantastic to see all the energy around this topic. So let's keep that conversation going. You'll see on the screen right now, there's a QR code, which will take you to some of Unmind's resources on neuro-inclusivity. We recently launched our neurodiversity in the workplace content, which is nano training collection, really giving managers the tools and knowledge they need to create those neuro-inclusive teams and some of the topics that we've talked about today. So you can find some more information about that there. The last thing I wanted to signpost to before we jump was our next webinar, which is coming up on World Mental Health Day, which is October 10th. We'll be talking about mental health is a human right, how to make work for our well-being, and that will be led by our positive psychologist, Dr. Katie. She'll be joined by Winston Clemens, who's a 2-time TED speaker, entrepreneur, inclusion speaker, and consultant, and Christina, who is the Director of Wellbeing at Covington & Burling, which is one of our fantastic shiny clients. So thank you all so much for joining us today. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you again to our panelists. Hope you all have a really lovely rest of your day. Take care.
My pleasure. Bye.
Bye.